Welcome to the webinar. Good morning, good afternoon. I am Vanessa Allen with Location Tech and your moderator for today. I am going to get us started with introductions to our presentation, Anaheim's new Hotel Worker Protection Ordinance, Understanding Obligations and Opportunities. Today's presentation is presented by Location Tech, Hirschfeld Kraemer, and sponsored by the California Hotel and Lodging Association. First, I want to give a shout out to our friends in the media. If you are on our webinar today, we want to let you know Chatham House rules apply. Everything that we're presenting today really is meant to be for the audience and not for specifically sharing in the media. It's off the record. And I'm going to move on to our introductions. So with us today is, just to say a quick hello, Sandra Oberle, Vice President of Membership with the California Hotel and Lodging Association. She's been there for nearly a decade. And Sandra, you want to say hello?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. As Vanessa said, I'm Sandra Oberle, California Hotel and Lodging Association. Just want to say thank you to both Jeff and Keith for involving CHLA in today's webinar. We're very happy to promote and support the webinar and all of the important information that they're going to cover today. So thank you.
Awesome. And Keith Grossman, partner with Hirschfeld Kraemer, who is a partner at the firm and a labor and employment law expert. Can you say hello, Keith?
Hi, good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Glad you all are joining and look forward to engaging and please, even though your mics are off, you have a chat feature. I encourage you to ask questions. I don't mind. Vanessa will gladly interrupt me. So please, as we're going through this, happy to answer any questions, both during the presentation if possible and at the end.
Yeah. And I should say, we thank you for taking time away from the ongoing battle with Unite Here Local 11 and representing the coordinated bargaining group.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, this is a pleasure to be away from those contentious negotiations where I'm sure everyone who's on this call either has been struck or is well aware that Local 11, in addition to spending time trying to pass local ordinances, is engaging in rolling strikes throughout Los Angeles, the LAX area, and Orange County.
Yeah. Thank you. And last but not least, Jeff Engel, who is CEO of Location Tech and a smart wireless network solutions expert with a very diverse background. So Jeff, I'll let you say a couple words of hello and introduction.
Hello, everyone. Appreciate that opportunity. We're all able to come together. I think these type of events are important. So yes, I am going to talk a little bit about our solution, but more importantly, I want everyone who's out there in Anaheim and surrounding cities to understand what they're up against and what do they need to do to be successful so they can make smart decisions.
Awesome. Before we launch into things, I think, Sandra, you've got a few words. We really appreciate helping to promote this webinar and helping to get the word out. And we know you do a lot of great work on behalf of the hotel and lodging industry.
Yeah, thank you so much. For those of you that maybe don't know who CHLA is, just wanted to give us a little bit of a background. We were first established in 1893, so we've been around for a very long time. I'd say we're the most influential state lodging association in the country. And we exist primarily to protect the rights and interests of the California lodging industry. And we do that, through our legislative and regulatory work. But we also provide valuable operational type of resources, such as education, training, communications, and cost savings programs to our members. Let's see, we're governed by about a 30-plus board of directors, and we have an education foundation that provides scholarships to hospitality students. We have a PAC, a political action committee, including an issues PAC. We also operate CABI, which is the California Association of Boutique and Breakfast Inns. They have a marketing component for specifically boutique properties. They're also under our wings. And we also currently manage the Hotel Association of Los Angeles and the San Diego County Lodging Association. Let's see, we're also a partner state of American Hotel and Lodging Association. So, you know, we do a lot and we cover a lot. And then as far as the current Anaheim ordinance, I mean, CHLA is very much involved with the ballot initiative, as we have been with other local ordinances throughout the state. With the Anaheim ordinance, this is probably one of the most, well, not probably, it's actually probably the most stringent ordinance that we've seen. As mentioned, I think, you know, we have handouts over in the handouts section, and we do have a one-page fast facts flyer that you can download. If you're a member of CHLA, you've probably, you know, this probably looks familiar to you because we usually do a fast facts on all kind of hot topics. So we've also created a document, kind of a matrix of all the different ordinances and specifics for the ordinances throughout the state. That document is actually available in the members only section of our website, or you can reach out to me if you would like a copy. We're actually getting that updated, and it should be available next week. So also just wanted to mention that there has been a website launched, votenoonAid.com. So if you want to go to that website, you can sign up to get updates on the Measure A campaign. That's where you'll go to, you know, volunteer, keep up to date what's going on, request a yard sign, anything like that. So as CHLA works to fight Measure A, we know that we're going to need everyone's support to be successful. So if you're a member of CHLA, thank you for that. And again, just happy to be here and support today's webinar.
Let me give a quick shout out. Before I was, in my recent role as counsel, as partner in Hirschfeld Kraemer, I spent 17 and a half years in the hotel industry as Starwood Hotels Deputy General Counsel, and spent a lot of time working with Lynn Morfeld, who is CHLA's CEO. And I can tell you, because I'm familiar with virtually every state association, the CHLA is an incredible organization. They do a great job. Sandra's modest. Their training materials are great. They are topical and on top of things. And for those of you who are not members, I would encourage you to check it out, because definitely all our Starwood hotels that were members were extremely pleased with the resources that they provided.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, Sandra.
Oh, thank you for having us, and thank you for those kind words, Keith. I'll pass them along.
Okay.
Fabulous. Well, I am going to kick off a poll because we're so glad to have all of you with us, and we're curious about what brings you here today. So I'm going to launch that poll and let you give us that feedback. At the same time, I'm going to turn it over to Keith and Jeff for just a moment to reflect on a year since you presented a similar presentation on similar ordinances, but in LA. So in a year's time, what's the word?
Well, I think I feel like Yogi Berra, right? Yogi Berra's famous quote is, or he's got millions, but one of the Yogiisms is, I feel like deja vu all over again. And I think that's apt here. The Anaheim Ordinance is just the latest project by Local 11, Unite Here Local 11, and really one of the three co-presidents is the architect, three co-presidents of Unite Here, Kurt Peterson. This story started actually almost 16 years ago, and Local 11 began this adventure really as an effort to try to squeeze non-union hotels economically in the hopes that they would come to the union and execute what are called card check agreements, which effectively guarantee that a particular hotel would become unionized. And Local 11 started first with a minimum wage and service charge ordinance covering LAX. That didn't result in any new unionized hotels. So Kurt then went to Los Angeles and got passed a similar law with a hotel minimum wage and a service charge distribution component. Being unsuccessful there, Kurt then went through a series of other municipalities, each time, as Vanessa mentioned, ratcheting up the scope and impact and predatory nature of these local ordinances. After the LA minimum wage ordinance, first came Long Beach, then Santa Monica, then West Hollywood, then Los Angeles and Glendale, and then most recently your neighbors in Irvine. Each time these were passed, they became more and more strict. And we'll talk about what's now on the plate because you have a bifurcated situation here in Anaheim. Your city council and the mayor passed a portion of the legislation that goes into effect January 1. But then there's this Measure A that Sandra mentioned, which is right now on the ballot October 3. And that has all the components and worse of what these other local ordinance had in place. One thing I did want to mention, another shout out to Lynn Moorfeld of CHLA. He and I, after the Long Beach ordinance, talked about, is there a way to stop the union from going from municipality to municipality to pass these things? And Lynn had the idea of putting on the ballot on a statewide basis things like panic buttons, et cetera, but that would have preemptive effect so that these local legislations would not be permissible. We pitched it to the industry, but the $20 million price tag discouraged participation. Right now, $20 million looks free compared to what these things cost. The interesting piece of this is, notwithstanding the high costs of compliance for these ordinances, the Local 11 has not achieved a single card check agreement where a hotel made the decision, I want to avoid the ordinance and get a waiver from the union, which is an interesting thing. Not a single one. I mean, he's gotten card check agreements, but not a single hotel has said, I'd rather sign a card check agreement than just comply with the ordinance, notwithstanding how expensive it is. The result, and I can attest to this in leading the current Los Angeles and Orange County negotiations with Local 11, the price that the union demands for a waiver of some of the provisions, like the housekeeping square footage limits, which we'll talk about, is a complete gag order where hotels can't talk to their guests and must have daily housekeeping every day. Minimum staffing provisions that say when you have X% occupancy, you look to 2019 and you must have the same occupancy in a position by position basis. And if you don't, there are financial penalties, including potential double pay. And then they limit the number of rooms you can hang. That's just the start of what the union asks for of its unionized hotels to try to get these waivers of the ordinance. One last thing before we dive right in. Lynn was quite prescient about the fact that if we don't stop this train in Long Beach, it's going to continue down the track. I mentioned the 5 or 6 other local ordinances. We just got word that there are 2 additional ones in the works, one in Santa Monica, where the union is insisting on an immediate minimum wage of $30 an hour, and also limits on hotels' use of contractors. And they just announced this week that they're going to pursue the same ballot initiative for Beverly Hills hotels. So this clearly is something that is growing and progressing, and at some point becomes a real challenge for our industry.
Deja vu all over again, indeed. Well, I just closed the poll. Why don't I share out the results? And Jeff, want to give you an opportunity to share your reflection on the last 12 months or so, and you may have something to say about these results, where 75% of the folks attending today have a hotel property in Anaheim, so they expect that they will be impacted by the outcome of the ordinances. 10% are not, but want to be informed, and it sounds like that's a proactive thing to do. That's great. And then we're glad the other 15% are here to listen today. Maybe after the fact, we'll find out why.
Just a quick comment. Deja vu is exactly right. I think what catches my attention, which I appreciate, is that 25%. We're already starting to look at to be better educated on what's happening beyond this. So even we started reaching out to properties in Anaheim about 6 weeks ago, right after they started talking about they were going to put this to initial vote at the the council. And then I attended the council meeting where they actually approved it. And it's interesting how slowly you can just see how people are starting to come on board and starting to be aware of what's happening, and that's showing up just as we're talking to hotels in the region. So what I appreciate is the 10% and the 15% who are getting smarter what's doing, because those numbers would have been much different. I think if we ask the next question would be, are you even aware of the piece? The simple fact of this, so many people are showing up to this shows that people are aware. So I know if we'd done this 8 weeks ago, no one would have shown up to the conversation. So deja vu. I'm glad people are taking the effort to get informed, because the problem with the LA is everyone had turned so fast and they were making quick, rash decisions where even if we have to move quickly and it does pass, which we're all hoping it doesn't, there's October 13th or October 10th is when things need to be done. I think it was October 13th, right, Keith, which you're going to talk to.
Yeah. We'll talk about that, because it's actually a moving target, but we'll get into that.
So I just want to deja vu. I'm done talking.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let me move on then. Keith, take it away, and I'll follow your lead on the slides as we go here.
Sounds good. So we talked about the origins. The origin is our friends at Unite Here Local 11 and their desire, at least initially, to try to increase membership or number of hotels in their portfolio, but now it is focused on passing these things to try to use them as leverage against some of the unionized hotels. So what you have in Anaheim, and I mentioned this in my opening remarks, is 2 pieces. You have a worker safety piece relating to panic buttons, and we'll talk about the specifics. That's already passed. That was passed by the city council and signed by the mayor, and that takes effect on January 1, 2024. But don't rest easy, because that date can be impacted by Measure A. And Measure A is a much broader initiative along the lines of what we've talked about in other markets. The union got signatures, sufficient signatures to present the issue to the city council. And the city council actually doesn't have the choice to just trash the measure. Once you have enough ballot measures, it has signatures, it has to be put on a ballot. And that's what the city council did. The city council actually has recently voted, I think 5-0 with 2 abstentions, to advocate against passage of Measure A. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of who's covered by the worker protection ordinance, thank you. Both the part that's already passed, the panic button piece, and the Measure A, assuming it passes. Unlike other ordinances that had a floor of typically 40 hotel rooms with 40 hotels, this one has no floor. So it covers all hotels regardless of their size. It also has this unique feature of covering event centers that have 20,000 or more square feet. Not all the provisions apply to event centers, as we'll talk about. It's the minimum wage and service charge piece, and then some restrictions relating to change of control events. The exclusions are limited. Licensed bed and breakfasts with a single unit residence, short-term rentals, and corporate housing. So if you're a hotel broadly defined, even if you're small, you're covered by this legislation. Next slide, please. So the panic button piece, Jeff mentioned, you know, when it becomes effective. If Measure A does not pass, then you have until January 1, 2024 to comply with the panic button provisions. But if Measure A does pass, and right now it's on the ballot for October 3, then 10 days after the city certifies the results, so assume around October 13, you would have to be in compliance. So there's not a lot of time to think and wait and wonder whether you have until January 1. It may be you only have until till October 13th. One other caveat: Local 11 has sued the city to try to change the date of the ballot. They want it moved later. They actually want it in November, which would be a very, very high attendance election, and they want it to occur then. You know, I'm not going to handicap completely. It is likely that Local 11's challenge will fail and that this will continue and be on the ballot October 3. I think for planning purposes, that's probably the wiser conservative thing to do. Assume this will be on the ballot on the 13th, and that you may need to comply on ballot on the 3rd and comply by the 13th. Next slide, please. So what is the likelihood that Measure A passes? Sandra mentioned early on, there's a coalition there, you know, that you can get information on through CHLA. It is a strong coalition. It's already done a lot of good work. I think it's not a coincidence that the city council came out against Measure A on July 19th. Right now, polling is close. I think the industry's optimistic because it wants to be. But, you know, plan for the, what is the expression? Assume the worst, plan for the best, or plan for the worst and hope for the best. I think that's the kind of situation that we're looking at. But it's a toss-up. There's no guarantee that this won't pass. Next slide, please. So what's in place already? I mentioned that the panic button provisions are already the law and they go into effect on January 1. But what does that mean? So again, it doesn't apply to event centers. These provisions apply only to hotels. It requires panic buttons, which are personal safety devices, but they're very specific requirements. And Jeff's going to talk about that in a little bit. But they have to be geolocated. You have to be able to track where the worker who is wearing this personal safety device is. There needs to be immediate response. So a noisemaker, a whistle, or just a button that you push that is an alert is insufficient to satisfy the requirements of the statute. The provisions also require incident tracking. You've got to keep detailed reports every time a panic button is pushed, even if it's just a test or a false alarm or an accident. And that happens a lot with housekeepers. You know, as they're moving around, they accidentally push the button. And then you have to track when there is an incident, what you've done to follow all the remediation provisions that are required. The statute also requires that guests receive notification of these protective measures and that the hotel has them in place. It's supposed to be provided to guests at check-in. There's also a requirement, and this is that part is in the existing law. In Measure A, there's a requirement that there be a very specific posting on the back of each and every one of your guest room doors. And there's a font requirement, a size requirement, but we'll get into that in a second. There's also training that's required now. You got to train your people who you're giving the panic buttons to, how to use them, what their rights are, what the hotel's protocols are for responding, etc. For hotels that have 60 or more rooms, you need to have a dedicated security guard. It can't be a manager or a supervisor. You actually have to have a dedicated security guard 24/7 whose function is to monitor the device that would signal a panic button trigger. And that person has to be free of other responsibilities so she or he can go respond immediately if a panic button is pushed. For hotels with fewer than 60 rooms, you don't need a security guard, but you do need a dedicated and specifically trained supervisor or manager. And I believe the requirements, there's very detailed training requirements, a minimum of 3 hours, and the person has to be relieved of other duties. So even in a limited serve hotel, you can't have the front desk manager that also, makes food or whatever else and checks people in. Person has to be a dedicated and can't have other responsibilities. At least that's the most conservative interpretation. Next slide, please.
Actually, this brings me to a couple polls that we'll launch as we'll let you move on, Keith, but we're curious to see those who are attending what you may have in place at the time if you are already equipped with a panic button solution, whether it has geolocation capabilities or not. And we'll let folks answer that, Keith, and then we'll let you move
Great.
on. If
Okay.
yeah.
I was going to say to add one point, just sorry to interrupt you, Keith. For geolocation, that means right floor and right room level accuracy. So just want to make sure I clarified geolocation.
Thanks,
Steve.
Jeff. No, thank you. So what's different in Measure A with respect to safety panic buttons, and what else is in Measure A that could be coming if it passed? It has the panic button provisions, and as I mentioned, it adds you got to put the sign on the back of your guest room doors, each and every one, and conforming with their font and size requirements. The other piece, and we touched on this, it moves up the effective date of when you need to comply. 10 days after the vote is certified, if the measure passes, you have to be in compliance. The most onerous piece of this legislation is the square footage provisions. And under the ordinance, hotels with 60 or fewer rooms, housekeepers can only clean 4,000 square feet in a day. And for larger hotels, over 60 rooms, 3,500 square feet, which obviously is not significant. And we'll talk about how those numbers can be reduced for things like travel and checkout rooms. Those are specifically, the drops are specifically delineated in the statute or in the measure. It limits overtime that's mandatory. So you can require employees to work up to 10 hours, but if you want them to work over that, it's purely on a voluntary basis. You can get them to sign waivers, but you can't require them to sign waivers or to work more than 10 hours in a day. It also requires daily cleaning. So you'd have to clean every room every day, not just checkout rooms, stayover rooms. And you could not have a green program. You could not have a program that says if you pass on housekeeping, we'll give you free breakfast. As a matter of fact, you can't even, the term the statute uses, solicit. You can't solicit a guest to pass on daily cleaning. A guest of his or her own volition could refuse daily cleaning by putting up a D&D or calling down to the front desk, but you can't solicit that request. Training, employees have to be trained on all of this. I mentioned this, the training requirement is the same. Record keeping. You need to have detailed records kept of the square footage assigned every day to each housekeeper, how much they actually cleaned, what their hours are. And in addition to all the panic button record keeping, at some hotels, like in Santa Monica and in other places where they've had ordinances in place, this record keeping piece and the trying to administer the daily housekeeping piece has required the addition of 1 FTE at least, just to manage the record keeping and the assignments. And then employees need to get notice of all their rights and all the provisions under Measure A within 30 days of its passage. And also, all new employees need to be advised of their rights under Measure A within 30 days of their hire. Next slide, please.
Yes, actually, before I do that, it looks like we've got
Okay.
results on our panic button solutions. Looks like some folks are taking their time to find the right solution.
Great.
What are your thoughts? Is that
Well,
typical?
you've got time now, but we're almost in August, and there's at least a chance that you'll need to have these systems deployed by as early as October 13th. And they do take time to install and test, and Jeff's solution is great, but you've got owners that obviously it's a capital expense. They're going to get involved, so there's a lead time. And while January 1 is further away, even that is not so far away. Jeff, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, my quick thought is I look at the 12% that have a solution. I assume it's no geolocation. I assume it's a noisemaker. My first question for those folks, or actually any of the folks that don't have something, is if you have Motorola radios, then there's an alternative where all you have to do is just turn on the software, because we actually have software that works on Motorola radios. So I'm looking at just kind of looking at the group and how can we help them without there's options. I guess where I'm going. There's kind of like breaking up into several different groups. So
Excellent. And we do have a question, Keith. I
Okay.
think the question is, we have house persons who clean stayover rooms. They take out trash, put towels in the room. Would those persons be considered a cleaner under the regulations?
So it depends how much of their daily chores are quote unquote uh, cleaning rooms, changing linens, working in the guest rooms. If it's less than, I mean, there's no magic number, but I mean safely, if that's less than 30 or 40% of what they do in a day, then you're okay. Then they're not even covered. But that assumes things that are not covered are, if they're stocking linen closets, if they're helping to fill housekeeper carts, if they, for example, if you have a hotel room with a balcony, normally the balcony, if it's cleaned by the housekeeper, is included within the square footage. You could dedicate the balconies to your house persons, and that would not be included within the square footage requirements.
All right.
So
It's
we
technical.
covered this. Yes, we covered this slide already.
Yep, I'm going to launch another poll and let folks tell us where they stand, whether they have on-site dedicated security monitoring, and then we'll let you move on to the next part of the ballot measure A, Keith.
Great, the gift that keeps giving, measure A. So and we can make the PowerPoint available for folks who want copies. Measure A also requires, within 30 days of its passage, a $25 minimum wage. There is no carve out for tipped workers. Again, this makes absolutely no sense, but that's part of the union's leverage. The union often negotiates waivers of minimum wage provisions for tipped workers, knowing that a banquet server often makes multiples of that. But again, for non-union hotels, you're going to have to pay $25 minimum wage across the board, and that starts in 30 days after passage of Measure A. But it doesn't end there. There's a COLA provision. So starting on January 1, 2026, and every year thereafter, the minimum wage will go up by a minimum of 3%, the greater of 3%, or a CPI formula that's in the statute. The other piece to Measure A, and this applies to the event centers as well. I mean, the minimum wage applies to event centers. So does this next provision, and that's the change of control provision. So if your hotel is going to be sold, you need to provide notice of the change of control, and the purchaser is required to offer jobs to every one of the current employees and retain them for a minimum of 90 days. Now, what this effectively does, for those of you who are familiar with labor law, it effectively makes the purchaser a successor employer. The second piece is, at the end of 90 days, every single retained employee has to get a written performance evaluation, which again will constrain the ability to reduce staffing, but I guess that's the whole purpose. The other component is service charges. 100% of all service charges must go to non-supervisory employees who actually perform services. Zero can be retained by the house, zero paid to supervisors and managers. This applies to banquet service charges. It applies to service charges imposed on an IRD check. And this is a new one for Anaheim, a new one for Local 11 at least. It also applies to porterage or baggage fee. So you have a porterage or baggage fee that has to go to the individual non-supervisory employees who provide the baggage or porterage service, and nothing can be retained by the house. The other piece, and this you should be doing anyway, but to the extent that you have service charges or other charges imposed on a folio, there needs to be clear disclosure to customers and to your employees. So no dedicated, yeah. No,
Yeah.
so two-thirds don't have dedicated monitoring. You know, for those in that group who are over 60 rooms, you're going to have to get a security guard, and we can talk about that. I mean, I've had clients ask me, well, does it have to be a security guard, or can I use somebody else? The answer is, you could use a supervisor and manager, but they can't have any other duties. So I don't know that it really saves you anything. They'd have to be trained as a security guard, and they have to work in that office with the panic button system. So I don't know that that saves anything, but you know, you could, that is a little wiggle room for hotels with less than 60 rooms. You are going to have to train and have a dedicated supervisor or manager who monitors and can respond to panic button pushes. All right, so what are the panic button requirements? They have to be provided to all workers assigned to a guest room or a restroom where other workers are not assigned to be present. So it's not just housekeepers or room attendants. It could be your public area housekeeping people who clean a public restroom. It could be your engineers. They're often in the room alone. And maybe if you have IRD, Your room service server might be in there alone. So all of them have to be provided a panic button and trained, etc. I mentioned this earlier. It's got to be a portable device that the individual can wear or carry on his or her person. And it has, as Jeff mentioned, you have to be able to track where they are. That's what I meant by geolocatable. The purpose is if the person presses their panic button, the monitoring security guard or supervisor manager knows exactly where they are, and they can respond immediately to the alert. We talked about training and monitoring for depending upon the size of the hotel. Employees who experience some form of inappropriate conduct, they are allowed to be granted paid time off. They cannot be and should not be discouraged from making a report to local law enforcement. The hotel has an obligation to reasonably accommodate the victim, which might mean additional time off to see, a counselor, for example. And there are very strict non-retaliation provisions for people who push, employees who push the panic button, want to make reports to the police, want to take time off, etc. Again, employees have to be trained right away, and then they need to be trained again annually. And I'm going to kick it to Jeff, but there's an upside here. If you end up purchasing a system like that Location Tech offers, you may actually save some money in your insurance rates because of the capabilities that the Location Tech panic buttons offer. And with that, I'll punt it to Jeff.
Thanks, Keith. And actually, I'm reminiscing about when we did this a year ago. It was almost exactly a year ago when we were doing this. And so one of the things that one of the sponsors from last year was an insurance carrier to help reduce rates. And so if someone's interested in that, I can connect you with that group because they've taken that and some other things we've done with leak detection, others to help do the piece. But just as Keith said, I want to quickly go through this because I want to make sure we leave time for question and answers at the end. And so what we've talked about is not all solutions are created equal. But when you're looking for a solution, you need to make sure that that responding staff is alerted. They know where the person's located with their location. And then in the poll we talked about, or the attendees were talking about, that some of them still have the 2D location. And one question we didn't ask is, and not all solutions are equal, as many of the solutions out there have blind spots, meaning there's certain parts of stairwells or parts of the building that don't have coverage. And then so if you have a hotel worker in that area and they trigger an alert, you're not going to, or security's not going to know, or the responders are not going to know where to go. So next slide. And this is the next slide starts talking about what we learned from a year ago. And I brought up Motorola. So a year ago, I started hearing, and as we were doing installs, there was an issue with how do you get security guards onto a responding system. Like, not hard at all, but since most of the security guards were third parties, how do you get them incorporated in there? So I think, as Keith has alluded to earlier and Sandra talked about, we're getting much smarter about here's the package and here's what you have to do. So we'll take all the heavy lift out. You just need to decide what do you want to do and then roll it out for you. So from security guards, so if you have a security company that's using Motorola radios, let's repurpose those radios so they can get the alerts and then get the information that they need. And then with us being Location Tech, if you have the platform, you're already going to install the platform. We have a customer that has just one leak detection, but since the wireless network's already there, you can have that come in and not have to add a whole full network in. So we have quite a few customers that have one solution, but we also have ones that have full coverage for all the rooms. But you can do leak detection, customer service, so respond. You can make your OEM devices or regular equipment that doesn't communicate. You can add devices to it to make them communicate back to let you know when they need attention. We also have systems like if you have devices removed from rooms, it alerts when something's been taken out of a room. And then leak detection we've gone to. But next slide, so we can talk about Valley View, which is, they're one of our earlier customers, but they keep adding layers and layers and layers. And it's not, their bill goes up, but they just keep adding layers because the platform's already there. So they have the Motorola system, their radios. So certain people in facilities carry the Motorola radios, and they have other guest room attendants who carry just the panic button, and they have others that carry something in between. But because of the platform's part of an ecosystem, you're able to pick and choose what you want. So they have panic buttons, Motorola radios that all trigger alerts. They have leak detection, and they're actually the one property that's just one area in a hotel where they have big water tanks that they want to make sure they alert to. And then they also have OEMs, or they've modified some of their OEM equipment as the pandemic started rising up and as an issue. They modified some of their hand sanitizer dispensers, so alerted when they were out. And since it's no longer a need, they're able to easily take it off the system and still move forward with the other pieces. So you can add and move and remove stuff as you go. So, we give you a platform and you can pick and choose what you want. If you don't want anything, then no problem. If you want to, then great. So next slide.
All right, we can
There's
fly
more
through this
from Keith.
stuff. Yeah, I mentioned, again, more Measure A gifts. You got to hang a sign on the back of your guest room and restroom doors, and the specific language and the font size are dictated in the law itself. Next. So I talked a little bit about the housekeeping requirements. If your housekeepers exceed the square footage provisions, every hour they worked in a day is double time. So for example, if you're a hotel with 62 rooms and your housekeeper cleans 3,502 square feet and works for 8 hours, all 8 hours are at double time. In addition, the 3,500 square feet gets reduced by 500 square foot increments for any of the things you see listed on the slide there, where you have six combination of 6 checkouts or rooms with rollaways or cots. If you have housekeepers that have to travel between buildings, you drop another 500 square feet. If you have housekeepers who need to work on more than one floor, you drop another 500 square feet. The square footage are also prorated based on an 8-hour day. So if your housekeepers, for example, finish after 6 hours, and you don't have some other task for them that's not cleaning, and you sent them home, you would have to prorate the square footage down by the 2/8, by 1/4. You also can prorate up, but only, again, because there's an overtime limit of 10 hours, you could only prorate up, 2 for the 2 extra hours. There's an open question for people who have rest breaks. I don't think that's a problem. You can include that in your hours, 8-hour calculation. If you have unpaid meal periods, if you have paid meal periods, I don't think it's a problem to include that time. If you have unpaid, then if a person's schedule is 8.5 hours with a half-hour unpaid meal, that's fine. But if it's 8 hours and a half-hour unpaid meal, then you may have to prorate, reducing the square footage by that half-hour component. Next slide, please. You know, I mentioned this, that it's not just that you have to clean every room every day, but you can't ask your guests, hey, do you want to pass on daily housekeeping? They can do it by putting a D&D, but there's effectively a gag order in the statute. Next slide, please. Waivers. The whole reason, as I mentioned early on, that the union is doing this is because they wanted to encourage non-union properties to become unionized so that they could get these waivers. One waiver you can get independent of the union by applying to the city, but the threshold is undesirable. You basically have to be bankrupt or show that you'd be bankrupt, or you'd have to shut down, reduce staff by 20% in order to qualify for that waiver. The other waiver is got to be part of a collective bargaining agreement, and you negotiate with the union. And oh, by the way, the union doesn't give that away for free, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide. Why do you need to pay attention to this? The penalties are severe. First of all, there's a private right of action. Employees who experience violations of any of the provisions can sue for actual damages, and then the penalties add up materially. $100 per employee per day for violations, and then $1,000 just a day per employee for record-keeping violations. Employees would be entitled to their attorney's fees and costs, willful violations, 3 times damages. And another gift in this particular ordinance, if you have an outside cleaning service that you use, for example, and they violate the law, you, hotel, are jointly and severally liable for their violations. So if you use Joe with a cell phone and Joe with a cell phone disappears or goes out of business and there's liability, you own it. Next slide, please. And then concluding this, you know, can we challenge this legally? There's some bad law out there. I can tell you that there are groups now that are having discussions about legal challenges, but it is not going to save you in time, if at all, from complying with this. So I do think you should prepare for compliance. You know, at the very least, certainly with the panic button provisions by January 1, but be attuned to the potential for compliance with all the Measure A provisions by October 13th. Do we have any questions?
That was a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot.
No, and I mean that in the best way. We do have some questions, and they're kind of specific, so I will serve them up to you. I will also mention for attendees who need to drop that we have a survey that you can take. It gives you the opportunity to signal to us if you'd like to hear from Keith or from Location Tech or from Sandra about CHLA. So there definitely are ways to stay in touch and to get more detailed questions answered. But before we run out of time, then here's one. I'm unclear what is in the statute currently versus what is being proposed in Measure A. So maybe that actually is, you know, we'll share this deck afterwards, and maybe it will be, I know you separated the content on your slides, Keith.
Mm-hmm. So it's, I mean, just simply, what is in the law right now is you have to have panic buttons. You have to have on-site monitoring with immediate response. Again, depending upon how many rooms you have, 60 or more, or 60 or less, or 60 or more. It either has to be a trained supervisor or manager or an actual dedicated security guard. Training and notification to guests at check-in.
Gotcha. And then there's a question about for those people who are not yet in compliance with dedicated security and panic button solutions, like what is the recommendation for what they should do currently to be prepared?
You know, talk to your owner, or if you are an owner, you know, get budget dollars ready. Unfortunately, you know, if this measure passes and you have to comply by October 13th, there's a, you know, there's a short-term capital expenditure. You know, you're gonna have to locate people. I mean, you don't have to hire them. You could use an outside security service. So maybe one thing to do is, you know, start having conversations now with potential security vendors, and so that you're ready to go in the event October 13 rolls around.
I was going to say, I almost feel like that was teed up, like we posted that one, but I know we didn't. So all those questions, you can either reach out through our website, locationtech.com, or send me an email. I can walk you through, just like LA. This is literally deja vu. I can walk you through again. I have relationships with a couple security firms that can help answer the security piece. So I can pretty much help you do one-stop shop. So security piece, I don't get anything out of it, but I can just help you guys get organized and run it through the game. So we did this lots last time, so it really is rinse and repeat.
Fabulous. We are over time, and so I think there are a few more questions. What I will do is make certain that I distribute those questions to the best person to answer, and we will follow up with you. We are recording this. We'll share out a link to the recording that you can view. Please take a moment to take our survey. We would love your feedback. Again, there's ways for you to signal that, you know, you'd like to hear from one of the speakers here today, and I will include also a copy of this deck so you'll have contact information for our speakers. Again, we'll close it out, and I want to say thank you so much for joining us. If you did, for all attendees, and then Sandra, Keith, Jeff, thank you so much. This was just jam-packed with great insight and information.
Special thanks to Keith and Sandra for being on this stuff. There's a lot of valuable information, ton of information. I hope everyone realizes that this is unusual to have someone from like CHLA and someone with Keith's experience and pedigree on a call to help everyone understand. So thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you for having us. Yeah, we're available for questions too afterwards. If you have my contact information, I'll get it to the right person. So yeah, we work for you.
Keith, final word to you.
Good luck out there. For those of you who have a local 11 contract that's expiring or expired June 30th, you know, keep your eyes peeled. We're nowhere near getting a contract done, but expect, you know, disruption, continued disruption, and union activity. And for those that are not organized, the union obviously is around and focused, and good luck. Other than that, push for rejection of Measure A, I think, is step one, which will benefit everyone.
All right. Well, we hope this presentation has served, and it won't be the last time that we come together. I'll say thank you again, and I'll close this out, and you'll be hearing from us with more follow-up. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful day or evening.
Thank you.